Chapter 10. The world into which Jenny was thus unduly thrust forth was that in which virtue has always vainly struggled since time immemorial. For virtue is the wishing well and the doing well unto others. Virtue is that quality of generosity which offers itself willingly for another's service, and being this, it is held by society to be nearly worthless. Sell yourself cheaply, and you shall be used lightly and trampled underfoot. Hold yourself dearly, however, unworthily, and you will be respected. Society, in the mass, lacks woefully in the matter of discrimination. Its one criterion is the opinion of others. Its one test that of self-preservation. Has he preserved his fortune? Has she preserved her purity? Only in rare instances and with rare individuals does there seem to be any guiding light from within. Jenny had not sought to hold herself dear. Innate feeling in her made for self-sacrifice. She could not be readily corrupted by the world's selfish lessons on how to preserve oneself from the evil to come. It is in such supreme moments that growth is greatest. It comes with a vast surge, this feeling of strength and sufficiency. We may still tremble, the fear of doing wretchedly may linger, but we grow. Flashes of inspiration come to guide the soul. In nature there is no outside. When we are cast from a group or a condition, we have still the companionship of all that is. Nature is not ungenerous. Its winds and stars are fellows with you. Let the soul be but gentle and receptive, and this vast truth will come home, not set in phrases, perhaps, but as a feeling, a comfort, which, after all, is the last essence of knowledge. In the universe, peace is wisdom. Jenny had hardly turned from the door when she was overtaken by Bass. "Give me your grip," he said. And then, seeing that she was dumb with unutterable feeling, he added, "I think I know where I can get you a room." He led the way to the southern part of the city where they were not known, and up to the door of an old lady whose parlor clock had been recently purchased from the installment firm by whom he was now employed. She was not well off, he knew, and had a room to rent. "Is that room of yours still vacant?" he asked. "Yes," she said, looking at Jenny. "I wish you'd let my sister have it. We're moving away and she can't go yet." The old lady expressed her willingness, and Jenny was soon temporarily installed. "Don't worry now," said Bass, who felt rather sorry for her. "This'll blow over. Ma said I should tell you not to worry. Come up tomorrow when he's gone." Jenny said she would, and after giving her further oral encouragement, he arranged with the old lady about board, and he took his leave. "It's all right now," he said encouragingly as he went out. "You'll come out all right, don't worry. I've got to go back, but I'll come around in the morning." He went away, and the bitter stress of it blew lightly over his head, for he was thinking that Jenny had made a mistake. This was shown by the manner in which he had asked her questions as they had walked together, and that in the face of her sad and doubtful mood. "What'd you want to do that for? And didn't you ever think what you were doing?" he persisted. "Please don't ask me tonight," Jenny had said, which put an end to the sharpest form of his queries. She had no excuse to offer, no complaint to make. If any blame attached, very likely it was hers. His own misfortune and the family's and her sacrifice were alike and forgotten. Let alone in her strange abode, Jenny gave way to her saddened feelings. The shock and shame of being banished from her home overcame her, and she wept. Although of a naturally long-suffering and uncomplaining disposition, the catastrophic wind-up of all her hopes was too much for her. What was this element in life that could seize and overwhelm one as does a great wind? Why this sudden intrusion of death to shatter all that had seemed most promising in life? As she thought over the past, a very clear recollection of the details of her long relationship with Brander came back to her. And for all her suffering, she could only feel a loving affection for him. After all, he had not deliberately willed her any harm. His kindness, his generosity, these things had been real. He had been essentially a good man, and she was sorry, more for his sake than for her own, that his end had been so untimely. These cogitations, while not at all reassuring, at least served to pass the night away. And the next morning, Bas stopped on his way to work to say that Mrs. Gerhardt wished her to come home that same evening. Gerhardt would not be present, and they could talk it over. She spent the day lonesomely enough, but when night fell, her spirits brightened, and at 7:15 she set out. There was not much of comforting news to tell her. Gerhardt was still in a direfully angry and outraged mood. He had already decided to throw up his place on the following Saturday and go to Youngstown. Any place was better than Columbus after this. He could never expect to hold up his head here again. Its memories were odious. He would go away now, and if he succeeded in finding work, the family should follow, a decision which meant the abandoning of the little home. He was not going to try to meet the mortgage on the house. He could hope not to. At the end of the week, Gerhardt took his leave. Jennie returned home, and for a time at least, there was a restoration of the old order, a condition which, of course, could not endure. Bas saw it. Jennie's trouble and its possible consequences weighed upon him disagreeably. Columbus was no place to stay. Youngstown was no place to go. If they should all move away to some larger city, it would be much better. He pondered over the situation, and hearing that a manufacturing boom was on in Cleveland, he thought it might be wise to try his luck there. If he succeeded, the others might follow. If Gerhardt still worked on in Youngstown, as he was now doing, and the family came to Cleveland, it would save Jennie from being turned out in the streets. Bas waited a little while before making up his mind, but finally announced his purpose. "I believe I'll go up to Cleveland," he said to his mother one evening as she was getting supper. "Why?" she asked, looking up uncertainly. She was rather afraid that Bas would desert her. "I think I can get work there," he returned. "We oughtn't to stay in this darned old town." "Don't swear," she returned reprovingly. "Oh, I know," he said, "but it's enough to make anyone swear. We've never had anything but rotten luck here. I'm going to go, and maybe if I get anything, we can all move. We'd be better off if we'd get someplace where people don't know us. We can't be anything here." Mrs. Gerhardt listened with a strong hope for a betterment of their miserable life creeping into her heart. If Bas would only do this, if he would go and get work and come to her rescue as a strong, bright young son might, what a thing it would be! They were in the rapids of a life which was moving toward a dreadful calamity. If only something would happen. "Do you think you could get something to do?" she asked interestedly. "I ought to," he said. "I've never looked for a place yet that I didn't get it. Other fellows have gone up there and done all right. Look at the Millers." He shoved his hands into his pockets and looked out the window. "Do you think you could get along until I try my hand up there?" he asked. "I guess we could," she replied. "Papa's at work now, and we have some money that She hesitated to name the source. So ashamed was she of their predicament. "Yes, I know," said Bas grimly. "We won't have to pay any rent here before fall, and then we'll have to give it up anyhow," she added. She was referring to the mortgage on the house, which fell due the next September, and which unquestionably could not be met. "If we could move away from here before then, I guess we could get along." "I'll do it," said Bas determinedly. I'll go." Accordingly, he threw up his place at the end of the month, and the day after he left for Cleveland. Chapter 11. The incidents of the days that followed, relating as they did peculiarly to Jennie, were of an order which the morality of our day has agreed to taboo. Certain processes of the All-Mother, the great artificing wisdom of the power that works and weaves in silence and in darkness, when viewed in the light of the established opinion of some of the little individuals created by it, are considered very vile. We turn our faces away from the creation of life, as if that were the last thing that man should dare to interest himself in openly. It is curious that a feeling of this sort should spring up in a world whose very essence is generative, the vast process dual, and where wind, water, soil, and light alike minister to the fruition of that which is all that we are. Although the whole earth, not we alone, is moved by passions hymeneal, and everything terrestrial has come into being by the one common road, yet there is that ridiculous tendency to close the eyes and turn away the head as if there were something unclean in nature itself. Conceived in iniquity and born in sin is the unnatural interpretation put upon the process by the extreme religionist, and the world, by its silence, gives assent to a judgment so marvelously warped. Surely there is something radically wrong in this attitude. The teachings of philosophy and the deductions of biology should find more practical application in the daily reasoning of man. No process is vile. No condition is unnatural. The accidental variation from a given social practice does not necessarily entail sin. No poor little earthling caught in the enormous grip of chance and so swerved from the established customs of men could possibly be guilty of that depth of vileness which the attitude of the world would seem to predicate so inevitably. Jennie was now to witness the unjust interpretation of that wonder of nature, which, but for Brander's death, might have been consecrated and hallowed as one of the ideal functions of life. Although herself unable to distinguish the separateness of this from every other normal process of life, yet was she made to feel, by the actions of all about her, that degradation was her portion and sin the foundation as well as the condition of her state. Almost, not quite, was sought to extinguish the affection, the consideration, the care which afterward the world would demand of her for her child. Almost, not quite, was the budding and essential love looked upon as evil. Although her punishment was neither the gibbet nor the jail of a few hundred years before, yet the ignorance and immobility of the human beings about her made it impossible for them to see anything in her present condition but a vile and premeditated infraction of the social code, the punishment of which was ostracism. All she could do now was to shun the scornful gaze of men, and to bear in silence the great change that was coming upon her. Strangely enough, she felt no useless remorse, no vain regrets. Her heart was pure, and she was conscious that it was filled with peace. Sorrow there was, it is true, but only a mellow phase of it, a vague uncertainty and wonder, which would sometimes cause her eyes to fill with tears. You have heard the wood dove calling in the lone stillness of the summertime. You have found the unheeded brooklet singing and babbling where no ear comes to hear. Under dead leaves and snowbanks, the delicate arbutus unfolds its simple blossom, answering some heavenly call for color. So too this other flower of womanhood. Jennie was left alone, but like the wood dove, she was a voice of sweetness in the summertime. Going about her household duties, she was content to wait, without a murmur, the fulfillment of the process for which, after all, she was but the sacrificial implement. When her duties were lightest, she was content to sit in quiet meditation, the marvel of life holding her as in a trance. When she was hardest pressed to aid her mother, she would sometimes find herself quietly singing, the pleasure of work lifting her out of herself. Always she was content to face the future with a serene and unfaltering courage. It is not so with all women. Nature is unkind in permitting the minor type to bear a child at all. The larger natures in their maturity welcome motherhood, see in it the immense possibilities of racial fulfillment, and find joy and satisfaction in being the handmaiden of so immense a purpose. Jennie, a child in years, was potentially a woman physically and mentally, but not yet come into rounded conclusions as to life and her place in it. The great situation which had forced her into this anomalous position was from one point of view a tribute to her individual capacity. It proved her courage, the largeness of her sympathy, her willingness to sacrifice for what she considered a worthy cause. That it resulted in an unexpected consequence, which placed upon her a larger and more complicated burden, was due to the fact that her sense of self-protection had not been commensurate with her emotions. There were times when the prospective coming of the child gave her a sense of fear and confusion, because she did not know but that the child might eventually reproach her. But there was always that saving sense of eternal justice in life which would not permit her to be utterly crushed. To her way of thinking, people were not intentionally cruel. Vague thoughts of sympathy and divine goodness permeated her soul. Life at worst or best was beautiful, had always been so. These thoughts did not come to her all at once, but through the months during which she watched and waited. It was a wonderful thing to be a mother, even under these untoward conditions. She felt that would love this child, would be a good mother to it if life permitted. That was the problem. What would life permit? There were many things to be done, clothes to be made, certain provisions of hygiene and diet to be observed. One of her fears was that Gerhardt might unexpectedly return, but he did not. The old family doctor who had nursed the various members of the Gerhardt family through their multitudinous ailments, Dr. Ellwanger, was taken into consultation, and he gave sound and practical advice. Despite his Lutheran upbringing, the practice of medicine in a large and kindly way had led him to the conclusion that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in our philosophies and in our small neighborhood relationships. So it is, he observed to Mrs. Gerhardt, when she confided to him nervously what the trouble was. Well, you mustn't worry. These things happen in more places than you think. If you knew as much about life as I do and about your neighbors, you would not cry. Your girl will be all right. She's very healthy. She can go away somewhere afterward and people will never know. Why should you worry about what your neighbors think? It is not so uncommon as you imagine. Mrs. Gerhardt marveled. He was such a wise man. It gave her a little courage. As for Jennie, she listened to his advice with interest and without fear. She wanted things not so much for herself as for her child, and she was anxious to do whatever she was told. The doctor was curious to know who the father was. When informed, he lifted his eyes. Indeed, he commented. That ought to be a bright baby. There came the final hour when the child was ushered into the world. It was Dr. Ellwanger who presided, assisted by the mother who, having brought forth 6 herself, knew exactly what to do. There was no difficulty. And at the very first cry of the newborn infant, there awakened in Jennie a tremendous yearning toward it. This was her child. It was weak and feeble, a little girl, and it needed her care. She took it to her breast when it had been bathed and swaddled with a tremendous sense of satisfaction and joy. This was her child, her little girl. She wanted to live, to be able to work for it and rejoice, even in her weakness, that she was so strong. Dr. Ellwanger predicted a quick recovery, He thought 2 weeks would be the outside limit of her need to stay in bed. As a matter of fact, in 10 days she was up and about, as vigorous and healthy as ever. She had been born with strength and with that nurturing quality which makes the ideal mother. The great crisis had passed, and now life went on much as before. The children outside of Bass were too young to understand fully, and had been deceived by the story that Jennie was married to Senator Brander, who had died. They did not know that a child was coming until it was there. The neighbors were feared by Mrs. Gerhardt, for they were ever watchful and really knew all. Jennie would never have braved this local atmosphere except for the advice of Bass, who, having secured a place in Cleveland some time before, had written that he thought when she was well enough, it would be advisable for the whole family to seek a new start in Cleveland. Things were flourishing there. Once away, they would never hear of their present neighbors, and Jennie could find something to do. So she stayed at home. Chapter 12. Bass was no sooner in Cleveland than the marvel of that growing city was sufficient to completely restore the equanimity of soul and to stir up new illusions as to the possibility of rehabilitation for himself and his family. If only they could come here, he thought. If only they could all get work and do right. Here was no evidence of any of their recent troubles, no acquaintances of who could suggest by their mere presence the troubles of the past. All was business, all activity. The very turning of the corner seemed to rid one of old times and crimes. It was as if a new world existed in every block. He soon found a place in a cigar store, and after working a few weeks, he began to write home the cheering ideas he had in mind. Jennie ought to come as soon as she was able, and then, if she found something to do, the others might follow. There was plenty of work for girls of her age. She could live in the same house with him temporarily. Or maybe they could take one of the $15 a month cottages that were for rent. There were big general furnishing houses where one could buy everything needful for a small house on the very easy monthly terms. His mother could come and keep house for them. They would be in a clean, new atmosphere, unknown and untalked about. They could start life all over again. They could be decent, honorable, prosperous. Filled with this hope and the glamour which new scenes and new environment invariably throw over the unsophisticated mind, he wrote a final letter in which he suggested that Jennie should come at once. This was when the baby was 6 months old. There were theaters here, he said, and beautiful streets. Vessels from the lakes came into the heart of the city. It was a wonderful city, and growing very fast. It was thus that new life appealed to him. The effect which all this had upon Mrs. Gerhardt, Jennie, and the rest of the family was phenomenal. Mrs. Gerhardt, long weighed upon by the misery which Jennie's error had entailed, was for taking measures for carrying out this plan at once. So buoyant was her natural temperament that she was completely carried away by this glory of Cleveland, and already saw fulfilled therein not only her own desires for a nice home, but the prosperous advancement of her children. Of course they could get work, she said. Bass was right. She had always wanted Gerhardt to go to some large city, but he would not. Now it was necessary, and they would go and become better off than they had ever been. And Gerhardt did take this view of the situation. In answer to his wife's letter, he wrote that it was not advisable for him to leave his place. But if Bass saw a way for them, it might be a good thing to go. He was the more ready to acquiesce in the plan for the simple reason that he was half distracted with the worry of supporting the family and of paying the debts already outstanding. Every week, he laid by $5 out of his salary, which he sent in the form of a postal order to Mrs. Gerhardt. $3 he paid for board, and 50 cents he kept for spending money, church dues, a little tobacco, and occasionally a glass of beer. Every week he put $1.50 in a little iron bank against a rainy day. His room was a bare corner in the topmost loft of the mill. To this he would ascend after sitting alone on the doorstep of the mill in this lonely, forsaken neighborhood until 9 o'clock of an evening. And here, amid the odor of machinery wafted up from the floor below, by the light of a single tallow candle, he would conclude his solitary day, reading his German paper, folding his hands and thinking, kneeling by an open window in the shadow of the night to say his prayers, and silently stretching himself to rest. Long were the days, dreary the prospect. Still he lifted his hands in utmost faith to God, praying that his sins might be forgiven and that he might be vouchsafed a few more years of comfort and of a happy family life. So the momentous question was finally decided. There was the greatest longing and impatience among the children, and Mrs. Gerhardt shared their emotions in a suppressed way. Jennie was to go first, as Bas suggested. Later on, they would all follow. When the hour came for Jennie's departure, there was great excitement in the household. "How long are you going to be before you send for us?" was Martha's inquiry, several times repeated. "Tell Bas to hurry up," said the eager George. "I want to go to Cleveland. I want to go to Cleveland," Veronica was caught singing to herself. "Listen to her," exclaimed George sarcastically. "Aw, you hush up," was her displeased rejoinder. When the final hour came, however, it required all of Jennie's strength to go through with the farewells. Though everything was being done in order to bring them together again under better conditions, she could not help feeling depressed. Her little one, now 6 months old, was being left behind. The great world was to her one undiscovered bourne. It frightened her. "You mustn't worry, Ma," she found courage enough to say. "I'll be all right. I'll write you just as soon as I get there. It won't be so very long." But when it came to bending over her baby for the last time, her courage went out like a blown lamp. Stooping over the cradle in which the little one was resting, she looked into its face with passionate motherly yearning. "Is it going to be a good little girl?" she cooed. Then she caught it up into her arms and, hugging it closely to her neck and bosom, she buried her face against its little body. Mrs. Gerhardt saw that she was trembling. "Come now," she said coaxingly, "you mustn't carry on so. She'll be all right with me. I'll take care of her. If you're going to act this way, you better not try to go at all." Jennie lifted her head, her blue eyes wet with tears, and handed the little one to her mother. "I can't help it," she said, half crying, half smiling. Quickly she kissed her mother and the children, then she hurried out. As she went down the street with George, she looked back and bravely waved her hand. Mrs. Gerhardt responded, noticing how much more like a woman she looked. It had been necessary to invest some of her money in new clothes to wear on the train. She had selected a neat, ready-made suit of brown which fitted her nicely. She wore the skirt of this with a white shirtwaist and a sailor hat with a white veil wound around it in such a fashion that it could be easily drawn over her face. As she went farther and farther away, Mrs. Gerhardt followed her lovingly with her glance. And when she disappeared from view, she said tenderly through her own tears, "I'm glad she looked so nice, anyhow." Of the prospects. "The first thing is to get work," he began, while the jingling sounds and the changing odors which the city thrust upon her were confusing and almost benumbing her senses. "Get something to do. It doesn't matter what, so long as you get something. If you don't get more than $3 or $4 a week, it'll pay the rent. Then, with what George can earn when he comes and what Pop sends, we can get along all right. It'll be better than being down in that hole," he concluded. "Yes," said Jennie, vaguely, her mind so hypnotized by the new display of life about her that she could not bring it forcibly to bear upon the topic under discussion. "I know what you mean. I'll get something." She was much older now, and understanding, if not in years. The ordeal through which she had so recently passed had aroused in her a clearer conception of the responsibilities of life. Her mother was always in her mind, her mother and the children. In particular, Martha and Veronica must have a better opportunity to do for themselves than she had had. They should be dressed better. They ought to be kept longer in school. They must have more companionship, more opportunity to broaden their lives. Cleveland, like every other growing city at this time, was crowded with those who were seeking employment. New enterprises were constantly springing up, but those who were seeking to fulfill the duties they provided were invariably in excess of the demand. A stranger coming to the city might walk into a small position of almost any kind on the very day he arrived, and he might as readily wander in search of employment for weeks and even months. Bass suggested the shops and department stores as a first field in which to inquire. The factories and other avenues of employment were to be her second choice. "Don't pass a place, though," he had cautioned her. "If you think there's any chance of getting anything to do, go right in." "What must I say?" asked Jenny nervously. "Tell them you won't work. You don't care what you do to begin with." In compliance with this advice, Jenny set out the very first day and was rewarded by some very chilly experiences. Wherever she went, no one seemed to want any help. She applied at the stores, the factories, the little shops that lined the outlying thoroughfares, but was always met by a rebuff. As a last resource, she turned to housework, although she had hoped to avoid that. In studying the want column, she selected four which seemed more promising than the others. To these she decided to apply. One had already been filled when she arrived, but the lady who came to the door was so taken by her appearance that she invited her in and questioned her as to her ability. "I wish you had come a little earlier," she said. "I like you better than I do the girl I've taken. Let me have your address anyhow." Jenny went away, smiling at her reception. She was not quite so youthful looking as she had been before her recent trouble, but the thinner cheeks and the slightly deeper eyes added to the pensiveness and the delicacy of her countenance. She was a model of neatness. Her clothes, all newly cleaned and ironed before leaving home, gave her a fresh and inviting appearance. There was growth coming to her in the matter of height, but already in appearance and intelligence she looked to be a young woman of 20. Best of all, she was of that naturally sunny disposition, which in spite of toil and privation kept her always cheerful. Anyone in need of a servant girl or house companion would have been delighted to have had her. The second place at which she applied was a large residence in Euclid Avenue. It seemed far too imposing for anything she might have to offer in the way of services, but having come so far, she decided to make the attempt. The servant who met her at the door directed her to wait a few moments, and finally ushered her into the boudoir of the mistress of the house on the second floor. The latter, a Mrs. Bracebridge, a prepossessing brunette of the conventionally fashionable type, had a keen eye for feminine values, and was impressed rather favorably with Jenny. She talked with her a little while, and finally decided to try her in the general capacity of maid. "I will give you $4 a week, and you can sleep here if you wish," said Mrs. Bracebridge. Jenny explained that she was living with her brother and would soon have family with her. "Oh, very well," replied her mistress. "Do as you like about that, only I expect you to be here promptly." She wished her to remain for the day and to begin her duties at once, and Jenny agreed. Mrs. Bracebridge provided her a dainty cap and apron, and then spent some little time in instructing her in her duties. Her principal work would be to wait on her mistress, to brush her hair, and to help her dress. She was also to answer the bell, wait on the table if need be, and do any errand which her mistress might indicate. Mrs. Bracebridge seemed a little hard and formal to her prospective servant, but for all that Jenny admired the dash and go and the obvious executive capacity of her employer. At 8 o'clock that evening, Jenny was dismissed for the day. She wondered if she could be of any use in such a household, and marveled that she had got along as well as she had. Her mistress had set her to cleaning her jewelry and boudoir ornaments as an opening task, and though she had worked steadily and diligently, she had not finished by the time she left. She hurried away to her brother's apartment, delighted to be able to report that she had found a situation. Now her mother could come to Cleveland. Now she could have her baby with her. Now they could really begin that new life, which was to be so much better and finer and sweeter than anything they had ever had before. At Bass's suggestion, Jennie wrote her mother to come at once, and a week or so later a suitable house was found and rented. Mrs. Gerhardt, with the aid of the children, packed up the simple belongings of the family, including a single van load of furniture, and at the end of a fortnight they were on their way to the new home. Mrs. Gerhardt had always had a keen desire for a really comfortable home. Solid furniture, upholstered and trimmed, a thick soft carpet of some warm pleasing color, plenty of chairs, settees, pictures, a lounge, and a piano. She had wanted these nice things all her life. But her circumstances had never been good enough for her hopes to be realized. Still, she did not despair. Someday, maybe, before she died, these things would be added to her, and she would be happy. Perhaps her chance was coming now. Arrived at Cleveland, this feeling of optimism was encouraged by the sight of Jennie's cheerful face. Bass assured her that they would get along all right. He took them out to the house, and George was shown the way to go back to the depot and have the freight looked after. Mrs. Gerhardt had still $50 left out of the money which Senator Brander had sent to Jennie, and with this, a way of getting a little extra furniture on the installment plan was provided. Bass had already paid the first month's rent, and Jennie had spent her evenings for the last few days in washing the windows and floors of this new house, and in getting it into a state of perfect cleanliness. Now, when the first night fell, they had 2 new mattresses and comfortables spread upon a clean floor, a new lamp purchased from one of the nearby stores, a single box borrowed by Jennie from a grocery store for cleaning purposes, upon which Mrs. Gerhardt could sit, and some sausages and bread to stay them until morning. They talked and planned for the future until 9 o'clock came, when all but Jennie and her mother retired. These two talked on, the burden of responsibilities resting on the daughter. Mrs. Gerhardt had come to feel in a way dependent upon her. In the course of a week, the entire cottage was in order with a half-dozen pieces of new furniture, a new carpet, and some necessary kitchen utensils. The most disturbing thing was the need of a new cooking stove, the cost of which added greatly to the bill. The younger children were entered at the public school, but it was decided that George must find some employment. Both Jennie and her mother felt the injustice of this keenly, but knew no way of preventing the sacrifice. "We will let him go to school next year if we can," said Jennie. Auspiciously, as the new life seemed to have begun, the closeness with which their expenses were matching their income was an ever-present menace. Bass, originally very generous in his propositions, soon announced that he felt $4 a week for his room and board to be a sufficient contribution from himself. Jennie gave everything she earned, and protested that she did not stand in need of anything so long as the baby was properly taken care of. George secured a place as an overgrown cash boy and brought in $2.50 a week, all of which at first he gladly contributed. Later on, he was allowed the 50 cents for himself as being meet and just. Gerhardt, from his lonely post of labor, contributed $5 by mail, always arguing that a little money ought to be saved in order that his honest debts back in Columbus might be paid. Out of this total income of $15 a week, all of these individuals had to be fed and clothed, the rent paid, coal purchased, and the regular monthly installment of $3 paid on the outstanding furniture bill of $50. How it was done, those comfortable individuals who frequently discuss the social aspects of poverty might well trouble to inform themselves. Rent, coal, and light alone consumed the goodly sum of $20 a month. Food, another unfortunately necessary item, used up 25 more. Clothes, installments, dues, occasional items of medicine and the like, were met out of the remaining $11. How the ardent imagination of the comfortable reader can guess. It was done, however, and for a time the hopeful members considered that they were doing fairly well. During this period, the little family presented a picture of honorable and patient toil, which was interesting to contemplate. Every day, Mrs. Gerhardt, who worked like a servant and who received absolutely no compensation, either in clothes, amusements, or anything else, arose in the morning while the others slept and built the fire. Then she took up the task of getting the breakfast. Often, as she moved about noiselessly in her thin, worn slippers, cushioned with pieces of newspaper to make them fit, she looked in on Jennie, Bass, and George, wrapped in their heavy slumbers. And with that divine sympathy which is born in heaven, she wished that they did not need to rise so early or to work so hard. Sometimes she would pause before touching her beloved Jennie, gaze at her white face so calm in sleep, and lament that life had not dealt more kindly with her. And she would lay her hand gently upon her shoulder and whisper, "Jennie, Jennie," until the weary sleeper would wake. When they arose, breakfast was always ready. When they returned at night, supper was waiting. Each of the children received a due share of Mrs. Gerhardt's attention. The little baby was closely looked after by her. She protested that she needed neither clothes nor shoes so long as one of the children would run errands for her. Jennie, of all the children, fully understood her mother. She alone strove, with the fullness of a perfect affection, to ease her burden. "Ma, you let me do this." "No, now, Ma, I'll tend to that." "You go sit down, Ma." These were the everyday expressions of the enduring affection that existed between them. Always there was perfect understanding between Jennie and her mother, and as the days passed, this naturally widened and deepened. Jennie could not bear to think of her as being always confined to the house. Daily she thought, as she worked, of that humble home where her mother was watching and waiting. How she longed to give her those comforts which she had always craved. Chapter 14. The days spent in the employ of the Bracebridge household were of a broadening character. This great house was a school to Jennie, not only in the matter of dress and manners, but as formulating a theory of existence. Mrs. Bracebridge and her husband were the last word in the matter of self-sufficiency, taste in the matter of appointments, care in the matter of dress, good form in the matter of reception, entertainment, and the various usages of social life. Now and then, apropos of nothing save her own mood, Mrs. Bracebridge would indicate her philosophy of life in an epigram. "Life is a battle, my dear. If you gain anything, you will have to fight for it. In my judgment, it is silly not to take advantage of any aid which will help you to be what you want to be." This while applying a faint suggestion of rouge. "Most people are born silly. They are exactly what they are capable of being. I despise lack of taste. It is the worst crime." Most of these worldly wise counsels were not given directly to Jennie. She overheard them, but to her quiet and reflective mind they had their import. Like seeds fallen upon good ground, they took root and grew. She began to get a faint perception of hierarchies and powers. They were not for her, perhaps, but they were in the world. And if fortune were kind, one might better one's state. She worked on, wondering, however, just how better fortune might come to her. Who would have her to wife, knowing her history? How could she ever explain the existence of her child? Her child, the one transcendent, gripping theme of joy and fear. If she could only do something for it. Sometime. Somehow. For the first winter, things went smoothly enough. By the closest economy, the children were clothed and kept in school, the rent paid, and the installments met. Once it looked as though there might be some difficulty about the countenance of the home life, and that was when Gerhardt wrote that he would be home for Christmas. The mill was to close down for a short period of time. He was naturally anxious to see what the new life of his family at Cleveland was like. Mrs. Gerhardt would have welcomed his return with unalloyed pleasure had it not been for the fear she entertained of his creating a scene. Jennie talked it over with her mother, and Mrs. Gerhardt in turn spoke of it to Bess, whose advice was to brave it out. "Don't worry," he said. "He won't do anything about it. I'll talk to him if he says anything." The scene did occur, but it was not so unpleasant as Mrs. Gerhardt had feared. Gerhardt had come home during the afternoon while Bess, Jennie, and George were at work. Two of the younger children went to the train to meet him. When he entered, Mrs. Gerhardt greeted him affectionately, but she trembled for the discovery which was sure to come. Her suspense was not for long. Gerhardt opened the front bedroom door only a few minutes after he arrived. On the white counterpane of the bed was a pretty child, sleeping. He could not but know on the instant whose it was, but he pretended ignorance. "Whose child is that?" he questioned. "It's Jennie's," said Mrs. Gerhardt weakly. "When did that come here?" "Not so very long ago," answered her mother nervously. "I guess she is here too," he declared, contemptuously, refusing to pronounce her name, a fact which he had already anticipated. "She's working in a family," returned his wife in a pleading tone. "She's doing so well now. She had no place to go. Let her alone." Gerhardt had received a light since he had been away. Certain inexplicable thoughts and feelings had come to him in his religious meditations. In his prayers he had admitted to the all-seeing that he might have done differently by his daughter. Yet he could not make up his mind how to treat her for the future. She had committed a great sin. It was impossible to get away from that. When Jennie came home that night, a meeting was unavoidable. Gerhardt saw her coming and pretended to be deeply engaged in a newspaper. Mrs. Gerhardt, who had begged him not to ignore Jennie entirely, trembled for fear he would say or do something which would hurt her feelings. "She is coming now," she said, crossing to the door of the front room where he was sitting. But Gerhardt refused to look up. "Speak to her anyhow," was her last appeal before the door opened. But he made no reply. When Jennie came in, her mother whispered, "He is in the front room." Jennie paled, put her thumb to her lip, and stood irresolute, not knowing how to meet the situation. "Has he seen?" Jennie paused as she realized from her mother's face and nod that Gerhardt knew of the child's existence. "Go ahead," said Mrs. Gerhardt. "It's all right. He won't say anything." Jennie finally went to the door, and seeing her father, his brow wrinkled as if in serious but not unkindly thought, she hesitated, but made her way forward. "Papa," she said, unable to formulate a definite sentence. Gerhardt looked up, his grayish-brown eyes a study under their heavy, sandy lashes. At the sight of his daughter, he weakened internally. But with the self-adjusted armor of resolve about him, he showed no sign of pleasure at seeing her. All the forces of his conventional understanding of morality and his naturally sympathetic and fatherly disposition were battling within him. But as in so many cases where the average mind is concerned, convention was temporarily the victor. "Yes," he said. "Won't you forgive me, Papa?" "I do," he returned grimly. She hesitated a moment, and then stepped forward, for what purpose he well understood. "There," he said, pushing her gently away as her lips barely touched his grizzled cheek. It had been a frigid meeting. When Jennie went out into the kitchen after this very trying ordeal, she lifted her eyes to her waiting mother and tried to make it seem as though all had been well. But her emotional disposition got the better of her. "Did he make it up to you?" her mother was about to ask. But the words were only half out of her mouth before her daughter sank down into one of the chairs close to the kitchen table. and laying her head on her arm, burst forth into a soft, convulsive, inaudible sobs. Now, said Mrs. Gerhardt. There now, don't cry. What did he say? It was some time before Jenny recovered herself sufficiently to answer. Her mother tried to treat the situation lightly. I wouldn't feel bad, she said. He'll get over it. It's his way.